Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Everman's Odyssey podcast, where we explore the values and challenges of authentic living through sharing stories and ideas. I'm your host and founder of the podcast, Cole McClure. Oh, I'm super excited about this episode. I got a chance to sit down with a good friend of mine who I haven't seen, honestly, since I got out of the Army. And we still stay in touch, and we're always checking in on each other. But it was really good to sit down and have a long conversation and go over some of these questions that we've been asking during these interviews. And in addition to that, just kind of let things go and talk about life in general. So this is going to be broken up into 2 episodes. So this first part, we'll get into, some of our habits as men, aspirations, talk a little bit about our service in the military and how that's affected us, and going deeper from there in how to move forward from that and how that's shaping our lives moving on after service. So I hope you like this first part. Like I said, we'll pick up for another episode because this one runs a little long, but here it goes. Thanks, guys.
That's cool though, because I've talked to a few people about podcasting, and everybody's urged me to do it, and I was just overwhelmed. Oh, yeah. I don't even know where to start. Like, there's so many different people giving advice and different setups, but right. It's like I don't want to jump in and it's like garbage. You know what I mean? Then you get whatever, and the time commitment, stuff like that, because I know that's the thing. Learning a whole new set of skills. So
right. Yeah, I wanted to do it for like a really long time. And then when I got hurt at my last job, I was like, okay, well, now's the perfect time. And I still never did it. But I just went down the rabbit hole for so long, like researching how to do everything. But it's so weird. Like, I don't know. I mean, I still don't know what I'm doing, but like trying to figure out.
I'm thinking that's a common factor with people like us that
right
gravitate towards the jobs that we've had and, live the lives that we live, is like the research oriented thing. Like, there can be no guesswork. Like, I'm going to figure this out.
Yeah.
There's going to be a plan. I'm not going to memorize the torque spec on it. I'm going to write it out. And this is the way it's going to be. And there's going to be a clear goal, clear direction, clear sense of purpose and productivity, and this is how it's going to go. And which is weird, stuff like that, because like in everyday life, my wife and I, Cassie, we're complete opposites. We actually just like, she's in college, and so she had to do this test. It's like styles of learning, and so she did it. Nobody was surprised how it came out, and then do it, and nobody was surprised how it came out, because she's very like global. It's like a big picture, but big picture only. Like, when it comes to like, how do we do it, that doesn't exist. It's strictly, well, what do I want it to look like? What do I want the house to be like when we're done?
Right.
And then I'm over here like overwhelmed, because I'm thinking like step 1 of the process, because I'm very sequential.
Right.
I've got to do this, but in order to do this, I've got to do this. And then there's 5 steps ahead of that. And then like trying to plan it out from step 1 to step last, like while she's talking. And then, so it's kind of odd. I guess it's not really odd, because that's still a very sequential way of thinking, is what do I need to invest in first? And at what point in the process do I start adding equipment here, adding equipment there, diversifying, different platforms and stuff like that. So
it was
that's
crazy. So
very
overwhelming. Army. What's that?
I said that's very Army.
Right. Yeah. Well, finally, Nicole, like, she bought me a microphone. She's like, just accept that it's gonna suck at first, and just start doing it so it can start sucking less. Like, Man, that's hard to do. I mean, she was right. Like the only way to get better at it is to actually start doing it.
And
But
I'm so glad that you are. I'm really happy for you, and I'm not just happy for you, but I'm happy that you're doing what you're doing. Um, One of the things, like I listen to podcasts a lot. Anytime I'm working around the house or driving down the road or whatever, I usually
yeah,
listen to podcasts, and I've been into some of the ones that are really heavily focused on like special ops.
yeah.
Ryan Fugit, what is the combat stories,
Mm-hmm.
and um, who's the other guy? He's like one of the biggest podcasters out there. He was a Navy SEAL, then worked
Oh,
for
Jock.
Jocko's. Yeah, I never got too into the Jocko podcast.
Uh,
Ryan, oh
what's the
gosh,
other? I feel like I can like picture his face.
Sean something, bald guy. He worked for
Sean
the
Ryan.
CIA. Sean Ryan, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like a lot of those guys are real relatable in some sense,
Mm-hmm.
but like the everyday, Joe, just like you really can't relate to a lot of it to a degree.
Right.
But then I could see, because a lot of guys like us will get into that. Well, there's nothing wrong with me. Like I didn't go through the same stuff that Eddie Penny went through. You know what I
Right.
mean? So, or the sheriff of Baghdad. Like
Mm-hmm.
do that. There's nothing. I'm good. And that was one of my biggest hurdles. Obviously, in the Army and out of the Army are two separate issues, but mostly out of the Army was, they talk about stuff like PTSD, right? And it's, well, what's the event that occurred?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's a little bit more complex than that. It's a little bit more nuanced than what's the
Right.
one thing that happened to you. And they're waiting for you to say, well, I got hit by an IED, or I got shot down by an RPG, or my best friend was shot in the head while I was in a foxhole next to him, or something like that. It's like, no.
Right.
How do you talk about that? Like, well, I did a job for 6 years and flew for over 2,000 hours doing a job that claimed the lives of a dozen of my closest friends.
Right.
And then not only the combat deployments, but what occupation, what MOS in the Army trains harder and trains to such a high level that it's oftentimes more dangerous in garrison than it is in combat, other than
Right.
aviation.
Yeah.
Like, because in aviation, you're still doing assaults, you're still doing pinnacle landings at 14,000 feet. You're still doing dust landings, you're still doing auto rotations, you're still, and especially Blackhawks. I mean,
Right.
heck, when we were in Germany, 3158 was the only assault helicopter battalion in all of USER and AFRICOM. So
Right.
who did everything?
Right.
If it was in Africa or Europe, we were there doing it, and we had to be trained for it.
Yeah.
So it's the stress doesn't ever go away, and nobody ever
Right.
talks about that. Nobody ever talks about that. So I like your perspective. I like that you've had a different path from anybody else that I know.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, but it matters, and people pick up on that, and people appreciate that, and can gain a lot of value from that. So good on you.
I think that's honestly like been one of the hardest things is like just kind of like leaning into my insecurities because yeah, it is different for sure, but like it's always felt like less than. And so like I'm still drawn to like the same podcasts, the same voices, like I'm listening to all those guys. I still feel so strongly connected to that community. But then if I like take a step back and I'm honest, like I don't fit in. Like no combat deployments. I got med boarded out, halfway through my contract. Like I stayed on rear D while I watched all my friends deploy to Iraq and Afghanistan. Like that felt awful. So then I was so hesitant, like, and I didn't even know, like, once I got to the point where I would love to start a podcast someday. Like, well, who's it for? Like, I don't identify 100% with anybody. Like, I, left a lot of friends and family behind when I joined the Army. And then when I got out of the Army, I feel like I lost a lot of friends and family because I'm not part of that community anymore, but I don't really fit in the civilian world either. And so, yeah, listening to like, Sean Ryan and Jocko and John Lovell and all these guys who like did the things that I aspired to do, like they're so encouraging. I absolutely am inspired by them, love their content that they put out and their messages. But I didn't know if I was fooling myself, like thinking that it was for me. So then like, okay, well, who am I talking to? Like, because I just didn't know where I belonged. And so I think the time came where it's like, I'm not those guys, but I can't be the only one like who.
Well, look at today's generation. Look at the generation that's currently enlisted. They don't have combat deployments. They went through all the training. And how do you talk about that? How do you talk about preparing to do something and being in the right state of mind and getting your head straight, getting your affairs straight, just living in that headspace 24 hours a day and then never having to execute. I mean, that's something that I've not had that experience. You know what I mean? And it's different. Like you did the spool up, you got ready, you did everything that was required of you and you excelled, and then you got out. The unfortunate circumstances. You got sick, no fault of your own. You were forced out of the Army. You've got a whole generation right now that's doing their 6-year contract and getting out and never having a combat deployment, and then getting out and living in Clarksville right outside of Fort Campbell where you see combat patches everywhere.
Right.
I'm like, who am I? You know what I mean?
That literally never occurred to me thinking about, this current generation where it's like, I feel like I've got like deployment blue balls or something that's just never going to go away. I never thought about everybody else who does that. Like,
I've got a good friend at Fort Campbell. Well, he just retired, which is another mind blower. Like, I'd be retired in a couple years. He, like, their entire battalion, the assault helicopter battalion at Fort Campbell, was only getting like 300 flight hours a month.
Holy cow.
And he had like 200 of them. There's like, dude. And he's another guy. I think he had 3 combat deployments. I deployed with him. Well, his platoon, his flight was attached to our battalion in Afghanistan. So I got to know him that way. But yeah, I mean, what do you do? Like, guys are inexperienced. Guys don't know what to do. And then I guess it's kind of the same between every major conflict, you know?
Yeah.
You got the big spool up where big army will take absolutely anybody from anywhere with any background.
Yeah.
And then when things start getting stupid and political and garrison life invades the deployments, anybody who can get out and because they don't have to put up with it, because they can find meaningful employment outside of the military, they get out. And then for the most part, as a rule. And then everybody who can't stays in and gets promoted, and then it just gets worse.
Yeah, exactly. I forget how much, like, I don't know. I feel like some people talk about like how military doesn't get a lot of flight hours, but to me it sounds like it really stacks up. So like I've only got 200 flight hours to my name, and that took a while to get that. Obviously, like I haven't done it professionally; it was just through flight school. But man, 2,000 flight hours is a lot.
Yeah, I think I got like 750 in Iraq. And then coming out of Iraq, I was a flight instructor. So I was flying mostly nights. Flew a lot of goggle hours. I don't know. I think I had around 500 goggle hours, maybe.
No kidding.
Um, yeah, just doing a lot of different modes. Doing day into night in the MVG.
Yeah.
Iraq was crazy. We flew. I remember being so upset when I found out that we were going to Iraq from Germany. Thinking, man, Iraq's winding down. Everything's in Afghanistan. I'm going to miss my chance at a real deployment. And
Yeah.
Iraq was like the Wild Wild West. And Afghanistan was so political. Like, you couldn't do anything.
Yeah, I mean, things were still crazy then.
It was like the roles were so weird. And the ROE and the flight rules and stuff were like, they're backwards. Because in Iraq, everywhere we flew in Iraq, we were doing route recons. One aircraft on either side of the MSR and flying at like 50 to 100 feet looking for IEDs or suspicious activity. And we called in a lot of stuff. That's what we did. And then Iraq is mostly small arms like AK-47s, just little stuff from our experience, And then Afghanistan, where there's a lot of anti-aircraft artillery and man pads and you're at high elevations. So, well, your hard deck's 1,800 feet. Don't fly below 1,800 feet because we're worried about sapphires. Like,
wow.
I'll take an AK-47 against my BAPS plates, but I'd rather not fly in perfect Dishka range. Like,
right, yeah. Jeez.
It was so bad that, you know what the CRAM system is?
Yeah.
So those were going off all the time in Iraq, like all the time, shooting down mortars and rockets. I had them at every installation in Afghanistan too. I think it was Fob Shank. I want to say it was Fob Shank in Afghanistan. They were getting hit by rockets like every single day, multiple times a day, taking casualties every single day. And they had a CRAM on the Fob, but they wouldn't arm it.
What?
They refused to arm it because it was going to intimidate the local population. Like, dude, who's shooting the rockets at you?
Right, like intimidation is fine. In fact, should be encouraged, you'd think.
Yeah, and then you had the knuckle butts outside of Bagram. They would launch rockets at us. Bagram's the biggest installation. And they would shoot them all the way over Bagram, and they would land in the village on the other side.
Jeez.
It was a blast.
That's nuts.
So one night they hit a Chinook that was spooling up to go get him.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you'd probably find something online about it. I was out with one of our flight instructors doing pinnacle landing qualifications for some of the new guys. And we were out, I don't know, probably 3-4 miles outside of the wire on this little ridge line doing dusty 1 and 2 wheel landings. And we had enough. We went to go back in and they called us off. They told us to go loiter. So you got indirect inbound. So you can't come land. So eventually they let us back in, and we could see while we were in the air, there was a Chinook on the ground that was on fire.
Dang.
We landed, found out that it was chaos. Listened to the radio, listening to the talk. They were talking about doing a full-on lockdown. Nobody's allowed to go anywhere. They were missing an ANA trooper. So okay, well, we thought, everybody assumed that it was a suicide attack. That one of the ANA guys sabotaged the mission because they were going to ball up these guys that were launching rockets at us all the time. And so everybody was searching aircraft, searching offices, out there with flashlights and their M4s and everything, looking for this missing guy. They had ANA guy that was sitting up against the arms room with his legs blown off. It was chaos. And what happened was they launched a rocket. They had this Chinook that was spooled up. It was at fly. They're getting ready to taxi out. The rocket bounced off the apron, came up into the ANA guy's seat, and evaporated. He just pink misted, and nobody knew where he was. So none of the air crew were injured. They were all standing on the forward BAPS plates when it happened. And everybody else got out. And to the best of my knowledge, I think the rest of the A&A guys survived, but I'm not sure. And it burnt down. They did an emergency engine shutdown and walked away.
Dang. That's nuts.
So I already told my wife, I said, I don't know how long this is going to go because I don't know what he wants to talk about really. But if we start talking about something, I don't know if it's going to be on topic, and we might. That's right. When did you end up leaving Germany?
I left January of 2010 with an official out date of like March of 2010. Dude.
Yeah, because you left while we were deployed.
Yeah. Yep, I remember like we did that Thanksgiving together, and then I was on rear D until everybody got to where they were going. And then that was it. No, that was a rough year.
I believe it. Did you go straight back to Reading? You're from Reading, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so I went I had such short notice because like when you're ETSing, you have to go through all these hoops, and they like help you build a resume and find jobs and make a plan and all that. Oh, and I went to mine, and they're like, well, what do you want to do? Like, oh, well, I want to fly helicopters, but I've got Crohn's disease. And they're like, okay, well, there's really nothing we can do for you. So they just signed the paper, let me go, and a week later, I was on a plane. Like,
gosh,
so I had nothing, and me and my wife and my new baby are in my high school bedroom at my parents' house because we didn't have a place to go. I didn't have a job. Reading had something like 18% unemployment when I got out, so I'm competing for minimum wage jobs with guys who just graduated college. Like, it was a shit show. Oh,
dude.
Yeah.
That sucks.
Hopefully 2010 goes down as the worst year of my life, period.
Yeah. Well, don't start talking like that. I'll tell you that from experience. Don't talk like that.
Yeah.
Nope. Like I told you in Messenger the other day, like, seriously, from the end of 2019 when all that drama started hitting the fan.
Yeah.
That was all I prayed. Like, please, please, please don't ever let people look at me and think if he can do it, I can do.
Yeah, but I was thinking about that a lot, and it's like, what? But if not, then it was useless.
That'd be awesome.
In the last episode, I was talking about, like, you know what? If you have to suffer, just make it worth it by making it useful to somebody else. Like, if it's just for your own suffering's sake, like, that's a bummer. Right? And I get, like,
it's
you
not.
Don't want pity or anything.
I wouldn't go through all of this for myself. It's like, I mean, it's not for me. It's for my kids, and I've got the 4 girls, and I've got 3 other kids that I've adopted with my wife. So I've got 7 kids. I've got a wife. I've got a home. I've got myself. I've got my parents, my grandma, my brother and sister, and their kids. Like, that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Those relationships and the well-being and keeping everything together. Like, I mean, if it were just me, like, I also didn't want to be in another relationship. Look how that turned out. You know what I mean? Like, well, yeah. All I can do is be the best dad I can be. I can't control the other side of the equation. All I can do is do what I can do here. So that's what I do.
Yep. Yeah, I've been learning that a lot lately. It's just like, you can only do what you can do. You're only in control of yourself. So, like, all right, well, just work on perfecting that, because all the other stuff is out of your hands, and, like, just do your best. All right, well, we'll shift back a little bit.
All right.
Yeah, let's see. So, for the people who don't know, obviously, because nobody who's going to be watching this really knows, except, maybe a couple people. Like, you and I both joined the Army in 2007, trained together at Fort Eustis, which is now like a joint base or something, I don't know. And then stationed together in Germany, different battalions, but, same tiny little base and still good friends.
I mean, it was like the entire airfield was only, I think, 3 miles in circumference. So,
right.
if
It's
you
just
stepped
a
outside,
circle around the airfield.
I could wave to you.
Yeah, right. And like I said, I got out in 2010. Did you actually ETS in 2013?
I ETS in November 2013, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
And yeah, I went back to California, and you're in Kentucky, so we don't obviously see each other. But it's funny, like I talk to you like more often than I talk to Fry, and like we literally like, grew up together. Like in high school, we joined the Army together. And nothing against him. I'm not saying like anything bad about that, but it's just like funny that you and I have stayed more connected, and I'm really grateful for that. Like,
yeah, me too.
And I actually
for the internet, right?
Yeah, right. Because I probably wouldn't write letters, that's for sure. But I'm curious. We might talk some more about like what kind of podcast you're going to end up starting, because I'm excited to hear that. But for now, I don't know, like with the communication that we do have, like I was actually still nervous to ask if you'd be interested in doing the interview, because it's just like it's a weird thing. Like, oh well, we haven't had a phone conversation in a decade, but sure, let's do a podcast interview. But you're like, hell yeah, like you just no hesitation. You seem pretty pumped to do it. So I was wondering, like,
It's just
why?
a conversation between friends, whatever.
Yeah,
I don't have secrets. I mean, I'll share things openly, and we talk it out, see what happens.
right. All right. Well, then we'll get into some of these.
Feel free to tell me to shut up if I go on a rant and I'm like way off the rails, because that's a very real possibility.
No, I actually I had a VA shrink tell me I was long-winded and talk too much. So it might be a deadly combination if the two of us just start ranting and raving. But whatever, it'll just keep rolling, and I'll edit out when I need to.
All right.
But so I don't know if you've watched like any of the interviews previously, but I like to use basically the same list of questions, because the interesting part to me is like you can ask the same questions to different guys, and you get such a wide variety of answers, and everybody's experiences are so different. And even when guys have similar experiences, their perspectives are so different. So I like to ask those same questions just to see the contrast in like how people approach life. So the first question here is like, who do you look to when you like model your behavior? When you think of like the type of man that you want to be, who's someone that you look to as an example?
How much time we got? Because I've been blessed. Like, I've been seriously blessed. My father is a great example. No one that knows him, and he would never accept it if he did, would call him perfect. But I never doubted that he loved me. Never doubted that he would do everything in his power to provide for me, my siblings, and my mother, and anybody that he could help. My brother, he's 4 years my senior, so you can imagine how that relationship was. We never were in the same school. I think in elementary, I think I was in like first grade and he was in fifth, so we never saw each other. We were in high school and middle school together, but we did a lot of things together. We spent a lot of time together. Our relationships had its ups and downs, the distances and the relationships that have gotten in between. But we're closer now than I've ever been with anybody other than my wife, Cassie. So
Nice.
He's a great role model. I have to throw in my grandfather. Was never fortunate enough to meet the man. He died of a super rare brain cancer when he was 51, just the year before I was born. But just growing up, hearing about him, the stories, just the love and the kindness and compassion, how the Lord turned his life around, from smoking and drinking and partying and carrying on. And the Reeses have quite a reputation for being a little bit wild. He was definitely a part of that until he found the Lord and he turned his life around and just completely gave it up and volunteered for the youth ministry at church and would drive the bus everywhere they needed to go and was just a strong, kind, loving man.
Yeah.
So I could go on and on. I mean, just the men that I got to serve with, like Nate Hagee and Gary Farwell. They're both passed, but just for men that never knew you, but would have your back, warrant officers, senior warrant officers. Gary Farwell was the first pilot I ever flew with. He was a CW4 in 2008. Go up into his office and he's got Broken Arrow awards on his wall and like all this stuff. You're like, I'm a stick PFC, and I'm just awestruck. Like I've never even been in a moving helicopter before, and I'm about to go out with this guy. Like, what's this going to be like? And just kind and patient and loving, and just the kind of guys that want to see you live up to your potential and will do anything to support you. Like this dude has every TM, AR, everything just memorized front to back and can do anything that is required of him with his eyes closed. But yet this dude that's just like leaning out the crew chief window, looking at the ground disappear, just drooling on himself because he's so excited. And he's got all the time in the world for him. Ask me a question, Private Reese. And then Nate Hagee, I can't not mention him. It's a great, great friend. He's a W-2, deployed to Iraq with him. Very competent. Very, very, it was thorough. Like, would jack around and was just one of the guys. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And I sat and watched the Phillies in the World Series with him while we were in Iraq over Skype with his dad in Pennsylvania. And very professional, but also if he caught wind that someone senior of you was not being just and was like just being abusive or was giving you bad advice or was telling you go out on the mission and do this, or while you're out on your mission, I don't want you to do this. He'd tell him to go get bent quick, like, and in a hurry.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, don't tell my guys what to do. If we're out on a mission, I'm the pilot in command. That falls on me. If I tell him to do it, or if he does it, if Specialist Reese does something out on a mission, it's because I gave him permission. Don't ever talk bad about him ever.
Dang.
You know what I mean? So I've had some really solid support, some really solid role models, and examples of what it is to be not only a strong man, but a compassionate, thoughtful, and protective man.
Yeah. Dang. That's awesome. So I've heard this question a few times, and I think it's like a popular thing. Like my oldest daughter and my wife both asked me, like, well, how often do you think about the Roman Empire? And I'm like, well, that's weird. I don't. And so we talked about that, but like my question would be like, how often do you think about those guys? Like that's like, to me, the Roman Empire, like, sure, it's a legacy, but like the legacy that I would think about would be, the people in my life that played that type of role. How often do you think about those guys and what that has meant to you?
Pretty often.
Yeah.
Pretty often. I don't do as good of a job as I should. Obviously, like, I don't stay in touch with you even as much as I should. We do talk fairly often through text, but I have a hard time with that. Something thinking about and communicating with or two different things. And like in general, because the few that I mentioned are by far not the majority. You know what I mean? Like the biggest, brightest shining stars I can think of, yes. And I talk to my dad frequently. I talk to my brother daily. Unfortunately, Gary and Nate aren't with us anymore.
Right.
I think about them often, very often. Especially, I stay in touch with their families. So they're always right there. But one thing that I have to check myself from time to time. And I'll give you a little bit of a backstory, short story. My friend Nate, we thought he had everything. Beautiful wife, was flying helicopters for the power lines, utility maintenance and stuff like that. From the outside looking in, his life is perfect. Like, dude, that'd be an awesome life for me. You know what I mean? Like, you look from the outside and you think, I wish I had a life like that.
Right.
He shot himself. So myself and a bunch of friends drove overnight for his memorial service, and we're all sitting in Philly drinking, reminiscing. And all I could think and say was, why didn't he call? Like, and why didn't we do that? Not blaming Nate, but it was more of why didn't we do this sooner?
Right.
Every one of us dropped what we were doing. We all have families. We all live hundreds and hundreds, almost 1,000 miles away. We found out and we got here overnight.
Right.
Why couldn't we have done this before? We could have been sitting here drinking a beer with me. We could have been sitting here. He could have been giving us a tour of Philly. Like, this would have been a completely different situation had one of us in the group made it a priority. So that's hard. And I'm not saying it's fair to think about things like that, or it's right to think about things like that. But I do find that it's easier to understand things if you think about them in terms of the extremes. Like, if you think about best case, worst case, like if you're talking about something that's at a level 2 and you don't know if it would work, well, would it work at a level 10? Okay, well, then it should apply to some degree. So I think about stuff like that. But then, it's hard to get in touch with guys sometimes. It's hard to tell your kids, hold on, dad's got to make a phone call sometimes. You know what I mean? So it's all a balancing act, and we just take responsibility for ourselves. And that's hard sometimes too, when you're groomed and trained and brought up in the world where everybody's responsible for everybody else. It's hard to shake. It's hard to shake, especially because you care. Like, you love those guys. Like, I love you, and I would never want anything bad to happen to you. You know what I mean? So you all feel like family, and sometimes the guys that you served with better than your family. But when it comes down to it, who am I feeding every day? And that's got to be my priority. That's got to be my priority.
Yeah, that's. I mean, I guess it's not funny, but like, I don't know. The fact that you mentioned that. So shortly before I got out of the Army, I attended 3 funerals because in like the span of a week we had 3 suicides like on base, and that just like ripped me up, and I didn't get it. And then I started the med board process, and I don't know, it sounds messed up to say like out of sight, out of mind, but that's kind of how I operate. Like, I just compartmentalize things and move forward. And then before I left Germany, I was reconnecting with this guy, like, used to be one of my absolute best friends. And then we had like a falling out in high school. And then, so I'm getting out of the Army, and we started touching base again. And I was looking forward, like, to getting home, we were going to start hanging out and like reconnect and all this stuff. And so I get back in March, and we had, kept talking about like, hey, we're going to hang out, let's go do this. But things were crazy when I got out, looking for a job, looking for a place to live, trying to figure out like what it means to not be in the Army, like overnight basically. And so I didn't reach out. And then one night I just walk in, and they told me that his wife had found him and he shot himself. Like, and that, man, like you're saying, like we had talked, why didn't he mention what he was going through? And then on my part, like, why didn't I follow through? Like, and I just beat myself up. Like, well, I just went to these funerals recently. Like the Army did all this training, and then new suicide rates came out. So we did all this, like, more training. I should have seen the signs and all this stuff. Like, why didn't all these people who were in his life before me, like, why didn't they see something? And just constantly like racking your brain. And that was June 10th of 2010. And I still think about it all the time. And since then, I've had multiple friends commit suicide. I've been to 6 funerals now for suicide, and man, it just tears you up. Like, yeah, and like it seems so simple.
I will never attempt to understand, but I can empathize with where you're coming from. I've lost a few friends to suicide. For the majority of them were accidents, aircraft accidents. But it's guilt, dude. It's guilt. Yeah. I totally see where, and please, I would never, ever, ever in a million years compare the two of us. And that's not what I'm trying to do. But you spoke about how you struggle with not having done what you intended to do in the Army. And so you get out and there's someone struggling with stuff. Like, it's hard. It's hard. And a lot of that, like, for ourselves, when we're struggling with things, we don't want to bother anybody else with it because you compare. Feel guilty because they have their own struggles, and you feel like you're just laying on top of it. Who am I to complain to them? You know what I mean?
Right.
And you don't want to pry, you don't want to be nosy, and there can totally be a level of fear associated with opening a discussion that you might not know as much about as the person you're trying to talk to.
Yeah.
I'm going to try to talk to this person and understand their problems. And then he's going to start talking about things that I know nothing about. And then, and then what? You don't want to exacerbate the situation. You don't want to make things worse. You don't want to look foolish. I've been there. I understand that.
Yeah, it feels easier to help somebody, like, if they're going through something that you've gone through, because, like, well, I know what I would want to hear. I know what I would say, like, because I've been there. But when it comes to, like, and I feel like I'm growing a lot, and Nicole has been instrumental in that for sure. But I mean, literally on a daily basis, I compare my service record to everybody else's. Like, everybody who's done more than me, I think about it on a daily basis, which is weird because I'm in California. I don't have this huge social life. I don't know a ton of people in my area that served at all, but I still, like, constantly think about the things that I didn't do. So even, like, my best friend since I was 4 years old, he ended up joining the Army like 6 months after I got out, went to 12th Cab, and deployed to Afghanistan, got out. Now we work at the same police department. It's awesome. But, like, even with him, like, sometimes I don't know how I can help or what I can say because, like, my best friend he's done stuff that I haven't done. How can I possibly? I don't even like to talk about my service because I feel like an imposter, and it's just such a weird thing to know how to help somebody. And maybe that's like narcissistic, and I'm thinking too much about myself instead of trying to help somebody. But there's so many scenarios where you wanna do the right thing, and if you haven't been in the right positions, you don't know what that is.
You just want to be prepared, and you don't want to be
Wrong.
I think you know what I'm trying to say. Is try to elaborate a little bit more, but I've been there. Like, well, I've had the local police call me at 3:00 in the morning because I'm friends with most of them. Say, hey, I've got a veteran that's just down the road from you. He's having a hard time. You want to come down and talk to him? Yeah,
oh, really?
Have some coffee or whatever. But then it's like, all right, well, I don't like in a general vague kind of way I relate, and I guess emotionally,
right.
But as far as experiences, like I don't know what that's like. Like if you're in a ground to ground firefight, I don't know what that's like. I know what it's like to face death. I know what it's like to come to terms with the fact that within the next 5 minutes, I'm probably going to be dead. And then to be fortunate enough to be blessed enough to walk away from that. I get that. But like the specifics, when people are talking to you, a lot of times they want to share the specifics because that's what's bothersome. And then to not want to be just one more person who says they care but can't relate, like that's a scary situation to be in. So don't beat yourself. You're not being narcissistic. You're trying to do what's best.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe by 40 I'll have it figured out, I think.
Yeah. Fat
Which,
chance.
when I was 25, I said I'll figure it out.
I'm getting close to 40. I'm not anywhere close to having it all figured out. So
yeah, well, yeah.
But that's the thing. And I know, like, before I started seeing a private therapist, I was going to the VA. That was something that bothered me an awful lot because it was what's the one thing, like, that's not a thing. What's the one thing that causes your PTSD? Like, you're asking me to diagnose myself. Two, a lot more than one thing. And it was just irritating. It's like just reading off a clipboard. There's no connection. It just didn't feel like there's any empathy. And I can sit across the table and my heart's beating out of my chest because when you're in situations like, beyond your control that were traumatic to whatever extent, like you have a physiological response to that when you're reminded of it. Unless you're like, you're clean and clear and you've processed it, which a lot of guys haven't processed a lot of situations.
Right.
I'm blessed enough that in the life that I'm living now, it's not an issue like it could be, right? I've processed, I've come to peace. I've got support now. I'm not being reminded constantly that I'm a broken piece of shit. So that matters. But how do you sit and talk about a near-death experience with somebody who has no idea what you're talking about?
Right.
And our job was so technical. Like, you start talking about something, and then like you have to say what happened because it's relevant to the severity of it.
Right. Yeah.
Well, my wife doesn't know what TGT is or RPMR. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You're getting into beats, but it's like the important stuff.
Yeah, or rotor droop or overspeed limitations, and then you got to explain it all, and then it's like, I lost the plot. Like they're not here. They checked out. I start talking about numbers. Nobody cares. It's okay. I almost died.
Right.
And a whole bunch of other people almost died because one person made a stupid mistake and then didn't listen to the people that were trying to help them. There. And okay, well, it's so difficult, man. Like, it's really important to try to find the right person. It's really important to find the right person that has an interest in your well-being and isn't just there punching the time clock.
Right, which is hard to do when you're going to the government for your health care.
It really is. It really is. And I would suggest that anybody that has the opportunity to go elsewhere, private insurance, or if you're like, I forget what the distance is. I think if you're more than 30 minutes away from your local VA clinic that offers those community care. Yeah. And that can be kind of a fiasco, but if you can manage it, and if your local office is like willing to help you with that, then do it. Find somebody, interview your therapist, find one that's a good fit, and be consistent.
What are, I can't remember why I started asking this question. It's probably because I've got a bunch of habits that I need to stop and a bunch of habits that I need to start, and I'm just not great at it. But what are some habits that you're working on, whether it's something you need to quit or something you need to start, that, like, when you think about, I don't know, the 40-year-old Ben, like, what do you want him to look like? What habits is he doing or not doing at that point?
I want him to not be a fat ass. So I need to stop eating so much cake and drinking beer and whiskey. Habits. Should have been prepared for this because I've been listening to your episodes, but I'm not. I could phone my wife. I'm sure she'd give you some habits.
Right.
Really, the best I ever was, I want to say, was when I was going through the beginning of the hardest time of my life, which I'm still in. I was getting up an hour before everybody else, brewing a pot of coffee, sitting in my recliner, reading my Bible, journaling, and drinking coffee. So getting up, giving the first of my day to the Lord, actually studying to the point where I was taking notes and dissecting things and applying them to my life throughout the day until I got to add more to it the next day. And that's, I'm an old man. Like, I was raised a certain way. I've got certain habits, and I've gotten too comfortable with, and I'm not saying this as a bad thing, because it's wonderful for a lot of people, but just opening up my phone and getting on the Bible app and putting on a Bible study, and before I'm 5 seconds into it, my mind is somewhere else half the time.
Like, right. You get a notification and you go check something else.
I hate reading off of a screen. I hate reading off of a screen. Yeah. I hate reading off of my phone. I hate it. So I'll open it up and I'll click play and have somebody read to me. And while it's reading to me, I'm thinking about what I need to do next.
Yeah.
And the kids are getting ready for school, and Cassie's getting ready for work, and the dogs need to go outside, and they need to be fed, and one of them pooped on the floor. I got to clean that up, and laundry needs to be done, and someone didn't finish the dishes last night, and it's everything, and it invades. So that's a habit I need to get back into for sure. Because this guy, I love. This was a graduation present from my grandmother back in 2006, and I love it. So I'm an old man. That's his King James version. That's
old school.
That's my style. I love it. And I get wrapped up in it, and I want to read it, and I want to think about it, and I want to meditate on it, and I want to take notes, and I want to do all the things. But when I wake up in the morning and I start going to the to the day, it's
Mhm.
it's not a priority, and it should be, but it's not. But I
Yeah.
want it to be. And also singing more and playing my guitar more, and because that's that helps. That helps with everything. It helps me stay close to my family. It helps me stay close to the Lord. It helps keep me focused. Because I've got limitations. You know, I've got nerve damage in my hands and stuff. Like I can only play my guitar for so long. If I
Mhm.
get if I get to watching a movie or something, there's no limit to that. I'll be there all stinking night. Like,
Yeah.
well, I watched the first Rocky. Now let's watch the second one. I'll watch the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Now it's time to watch Fistful of Dollars and For a Few Dollars More. I'll watch The Outlaw Josie Wales. Now it's time to watch Pale Rider. You know, like you know how that rabbit hole can get.
Yeah.
Gets you good. So focus in on things that are productive. Doing things that will help me to contribute to my family, to myself, to the Lord, and the people around me, other than just being a consumer.
Hmm.
It's so easy to talk to the kids about it. It's like, what have you been doing all day? Like you're playing flipping Angry Birds or Minecraft or something. Like all you're doing is making somebody else rich. Why don't you do something for yourself that's productive? And
Yeah.
then my back's sore. I'm gonna go sit on the couch and play Formula One for 3 hours. Like, how's that any different? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I know exactly what you mean.
Like
So
I can still read a book with a sore back. You know what I mean? I can
right.
still pay bills. I can still fold laundry. You know what I mean? I don't have to stop being a productive member of our family just because whatever. But fill in the reason. So
Right. Yeah. I get on my 14-year-old all the time. Like, oh, you're constantly on this phone that I gave you, and now I'm surprised that you're using it. Like, always have headphones in. You're always on this screen or doing this, even though, like, in all honesty, like, she reads, a lot, she writes, she gets great grades. Like, but me, I'll be like, all right, well, it's time for you to go to bed, so I can sit here and watch Netflix for an hour before I go to sleep. Like, instead of, yeah, like you're saying, like doing something productive, whether it contributes to the family or contributes to just like me being a better person. And it's so funny that, like, the things you're talking about, like, are the exact same things that, like, I'll go through these little spurts of, like, I'll start journaling, and it makes such a big impact in my life. And then, like, one thing is like, well, I can't do it because I have to do this right now. And that's all it takes to, like, knock me off track for a month. And I don't know. So now I've never been much of a reader. I'm trying to get back into it, and now I'm reading all these different books and doing a lot of research and stuff for the podcast, and listening to these other authors. And then all of a sudden, I'm like, wait a second, like, man, I was not reading my Bible hardly ever, and now I've got time for these like three other books that were also written, 1,000 years ago or whatever. Like, so I started just like, okay, we're gonna put away the Stoic philosophy book. We're gonna put this away. And I'm like, if I'm gonna read, like, I should be pulling from scripture. So I started doing that, and that's still, hit or miss. And I think about, like, when you talk about, like, when I was at my best, and I think about that a lot, and how I used to play guitar all the time, and did worship for high school and for basic training and for chapel in Germany, and then it just went away. And I always just tell myself, like, well, I don't need to get back into it. I wasn't that good at it to begin with. Like, when I think about, like, oh, I wish I was, involved in church again and doing worship and playing it, or even just at home. And, like, I don't even want to get out and play and sing at home because, like, I was just mediocre, as if that's what it was about. And it's funny, like, I know exactly what I should be doing, but there's always just the dumbest reason not to do it that is somehow more powerful.
the thing
Yeah.
I've got. Are you familiar with the band Reliant K?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I listen to them a lot when I was a teenager, and still enjoy
Mm-hmm.
their music. Let's see him at a dive bar in Nashville one time. I've been fortunate enough to see him 3 times. Got to see him at the Ryman with Switchfoot. I think in 16, maybe. I don't know. But anyhow, he had one of their opening bands was Mike Main's and the Branches. And there's a song on their album called Drifter. And when I'm like to that spot where it's like, man, I haven't played my guitar in a long time. I haven't sang in a long time. I've like just been disconnected from everybody, from the Lord, from my family, from my own thoughts and ambitions. I'll pick up my guitar and I'll sit down and I'll play and sing that song. And it's like, all right, that's right. That's right. That's where my mind needs to be. That's where my heart needs to be. That's what my focus needs to be on. Yeah, I screw up. Yeah, I don't do the things that I need to do that are good for me. But just tear it all down and build it back fresh and remind me that you're for me and you're not against me. And you're just kind of reshift focus. So that's good for me. Just realizing that I have access to things that are good for me and that's where I need to focus.
Nice. Yeah, we may need to find a song like that. I might look it up tonight.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good place to end for this first part of the episode. Like I said, we'll get into the rest of the questions and talk more later on, and that episode will be coming out next. So I hope you enjoyed it, and as always, feel free to share this. Send me a message or a comment on social media. Let me know how you guys relate to any of the stuff that we've talked about here, or if there's something that you would like to see discussed in the future. But as always, thanks for tuning in, guys. Take care.